Welcome to the channel drop of Water of Origin. We are happy to have you join us on our journey to discover interesting stories of history, culture, and art. If you like this content, don't forget to click the monitor and register channel to not miss the latest videos. Today we will embark on a special journey where we will travel back to the Middle Ages, a challenging and mysterious period, and at the same time explore the inspiring creative journey of Frida Kahlo, a timeless art icon. Let's get started. Explore the harsh medieval life and artistic journey of Frida Kahlo Part 1, Introduction to Journey Through Time. Welcome to a unique journey where we will travel back to the Middle Ages, a challenging and mysterious period, and enter the colorful art world of Frida Kahlo. This content not only provides an insight into how people survived in harsh conditions, but also celebrates an artist who turned pain into creative power. The Middle Ages were not only an era of war and plague, but also a time where stories of survival were told through each page of history. Meanwhile, Frida Kahlo, with her iconic paintings, left an indelible mark on the history of world art. Join us as we explore each aspect of her life and art through these 15 detailed sections. The journey begins in medieval Europe, spanning from the 5th to the 15th centuries, a period described as the dark side of history. This was an era dominated by the feudal system, where lords controlled land and the people paid tribute in exchange for protection. The lives of most people, especially peasants, were a series of hard labor, facing poverty, disease, and natural disasters. These harsh living conditions not only affected the physical, but also shaped the soul and culture of an era, from small villages with houses made of earth and wood to crowded but unsanitary cities. Every corner of society reflected the fragility of life. The muddy dirt roads, the sirens from castles, and the smell of smoke from primitive fireplaces all paint a vivid yet gloomy picture. Frida Kahlo's artistic journey, meanwhile, is a different story. Born in Mexico in 1907, her life was a mixture of physical pain and extraordinary spiritual strength. A tram accident at the age of 18 not only took away her mobility but also opened the door to art, where she found release. Frida's self-portraits are not just drawings, but a true account of her wounded body, her sensitive soul, and her deep Mexican cultural identity. This journey will take us from the muddy medieval fields to the colorful paintings of Casa Azul, where Frida lived and created until her last breath. From the groans of the peasants under the burden of labor, to the sound of brushes hitting canvas in Frida's small room, these two worlds, though separated by centuries, are connected by the will to live and create. The goal of this article is not only to retell history but also to arouse curiosity and inspiration. We will delve into every aspect of medieval life, from food and clothing to medicine and labor, to better understand how people overcame adversity. At the same time, Frida Kahlo's story will be a beacon, illuminating how art can be a powerful weapon against pain and injustice. Each section will be expanded with vivid detail, deep analysis of tone, rhythm, and emotion, giving the reader an experience of witnessing history and art through a new lens. Imagine yourself standing in a medieval field where the wind whistles, through thatched huts, mixed with the panting of peasants plowing the fields. Then you step into a studio in Mexico, where Frida Kahlo holds her paintbrush, her gaze steadfast in the face of pain. These two worlds, though centuries apart, tell the same story, the power of humanity in the face of adversity. Over 15 parts, we will explore, feel, and learn from these historical and artistic lessons. We will learn how medieval peasants faced hunger and cold, how Frida turned her painful days into artistic masterpieces, and how both stories reflect the indomitable human spirit. In addition, the article will add details about the historical context, such as the development of the feudal system, the religious wars, and how they affected daily life. With Frida, we will delve into famous works such as The Two Fridas Good, the I, Broken Column, analyzing how she uses color and symbolism to convey her message. The story's rhythm is carefully constructed, from slow descriptions of medieval hardships to vibrant passages about Frida's artistic journey, keeping the audience engaged throughout each section. So prepare your mind, open your heart, and channel drop. of water of origin step into this magical journey. Part 2. Primitive life in the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages are a vivid but bleak picture of human life. Most people were peasants working from dawn to dusk on the Lord's fields. With no modern machinery, they relied on manual labor with rudimentary tools such as sickles and broken hoes. The staple food was coarse bread, thin porridge, and occasionally turnips, the only thing that could be grown year-round. Meat was rare, available only a few times a year, while fresh fruit was a luxury, often fermented into wine. Life was not simple but dangerous, where every day was a fight for survival. Imagine a cold morning in a medieval village, when the mist still covers the fields and the droplets of water on the blades of grass reflect the faint light of the rising sun. The peasants, with calloused hands and haggard faces, begin the day by dragging wooden plows across the rocky ground. With no horses or oxen to draw them in many poor places, they carry the load themselves, their shoulders bowed under the weight, their panting mingling with the cold wind. The Lord, who lives in a lavish castle with stone walls and huge fireplaces, demands a large share of the harvest, leaving the people with just enough to get by. Food becomes the primary concern, the fragile thread that connects life and death. Bread, made from coarse wheat or barley, was the staple food, but it was often as hard as a rock, requiring them to soak it in water or thin soup to chew. In famine, years when crops failed due to drought or flood, people even mixed clay or tree bark into the dough to increase its volume, leading to ailments such as chronic constipation or slow poisoning. Thin porridge made from oats or broken grains was the daily meal, but it was so poor in nutrition that it quickly weakened children and the elderly. Meat, though a valuable source of protein, was only available on festive occasions such as Christmas or when a farm animal died unexpectedly from disease. Fresh fruit such as apples or pears was rare, and when it was available, it was often fermented into wine to preserve over the winter, resulting in a sour drink that was considered safer than water. Spices, such as pepper and salt, were luxuries, reserved for the nobility, while peasants had to make do with bland food, sometimes adding only weeds for flavor. The main drink was lager, as clean water was scarce and often contaminated with sewage or animal feces, while spirits were sometimes used as a sedative or to warm the body on cold winter nights. Life was not just about deprivation, but also a constant struggle with nature and society, where each day was a small victory over adversity. Oral stories of failed harvests, scarce meals, and families who lost loved ones to hunger and cold were told around the flickering fire, becoming a collective memory. Part 3. Clothing and hygiene. In the extreme, medieval clothing is a different story. Most people owned just one outfit, often made of coarse wool or linen, and wore it for months or even years until it fell apart. Underwear was a luxury, and laundry was virtually non-existent. There was no soap or washing machine, so clothes were cleaned by boiling water over fires, an expensive and time-consuming process. The foul odors of bodies and clothes mingled with the air, while insects like fleas and bedbugs became unwelcome companions. Personal hygiene was an alien concept, making life even more challenging. Imagine a peasant emerging from his thatched hut in the morning wearing a rough woolen shirt that has faded and torn in several places after years of use. Wool, while warm in the cold winter, also retains sweat, dirt, and a distinctive unpleasant odor, creating a natural but inconvenient armor. Linen, while more breathable and preferred in the summer, is fragile and tears easily, forcing the wearer to constantly patch it up with scraps of fabric found around the village. Underwear, if any, is usually a small piece of scrap fabric, but most people skip it to save resources and time, leaving the skin rubbing directly against the rough fabric, causing red, chafed chaff. Washing was a luxury, requiring fresh water, which was scarce and had to be fetched from wells or streams, and time that was unavailable between long days of labor. Instead, they beat off the dust with wooden sticks or dried it in the rare sun. But this rarely removed the stench that had seeped into the fibers. Soap, even in its crude form made from animal fat and ashes, was a luxury reserved for the nobility. while peasants resorted to using plain water or rainwater to clean themselves, a process that was ineffective and sometimes worsened the filth. The stench of bodily fluids, combined with the stench of animal dung from stables and rotting food, created a stifling atmosphere in the village, where breathing was an ordeal. Insects were an inseparable part of life. Fleas hid in the folds of their clothes. Bedbugs crawled on their straw beds, and ticks bit them as they worked in the fields, leaving behind persistent itchy welts. With no effective insecticides or means of protection, people scratched themselves, sometimes rubbing leaves or ashes on their skin in the hope of relieving the discomfort. These persistent itches affected not only their physical health but also their mental health, leaving them in a constant state of fatigue and frustration. Personal hygiene was virtually non-existent, with bathing seen as a risk of stripping the skin of its natural protection, a common but mistaken belief that while there were few, public baths quickly became places for gossip, gambling, or even spreading disease rather than for cleaning. Part 4. Pain from the body and health medieval. Health was a never-ending struggle. Skin was chafed from rough clothing, while insect bites left people itching constantly. Without dermatologists or medications like hydrocortisone, people just had to endure. Dentistry was also a major problem, without toothbrushes or toothpaste. People chewed twigs or rinsed their mouths with wine. Tooth decay was widespread, gums swelled, and pain became daily companions. Those lucky enough to avoid infection still faced the risk of sepsis from even minor injuries, leading to a silent death. Imagine red, scratched skin, covered in tiny scratches from constant friction with rough fabrics, unprotected by any lotions or ointments. Every step was a sharp pain, as insects bit relentlessly, leaving itchy welts that spread across the arms, legs, and even the neck. Without modern medical knowledge or dermatologists, people had to rely on ineffective folk remedies, like poultices of leaves or clay, in the hope of alleviating the discomfort. Minor work injuries like cuts from sickles or thorns easily became infected in unsanitary conditions, leading to high fevers and eventually sepsis, a silent killer with no cure. Families huddled around the sickbed praying for a miracle from God, while death slowly but surely came. Teeth were another haunt, in a place where modern toothbrushes and toothpastes were not available. People used twigs, usually willow or oak, to scrape plaque off or rinse their mouths with strong alcohol in the hope of relieving pain and disinfecting. However, this did not prevent tooth decay from spreading like a silent epidemic, causing swollen gums and sometimes tooth loss within a few years. Sugar, though scarce and mostly an import for the nobility, began to appear in some of the wealthier households, worsening the problem. Dental pain became a daily companion, with throbbing pains that made it difficult to sleep or eat, and sometimes led to desperate decisions like pulling out teeth with stones or crude tools. Health was not just a personal issue but a burden on the community, where disease spread rapidly in cramped and unsanitary living conditions. Diseases such as smallpox, bubonic plague, or malaria from contaminated water claimed lives in droves, leaving villages deserted and families torn apart. Those lucky enough to survive faced long-term consequences: weakened bodies, depressed spirits, and dwindling hope. Yet they continued to work, continued to live, a testament to the inner strength of humanity in the face of adversity, retold around the flickering fire, becoming a collective memory. Part 5. Work and survival. Pressure medieval work had no concept of rest. With 90% of the population being peasants, they worked from dawn to dusk, 6 days a week. Sunday was the only day off, but only if they were not facing illness or injury. Women not only worked in the fields, but also looked after the family, cooked meals, and raised children from the age of 5. Children were sent to work early. There was no school or play, just a wooden plow and the hope of surviving. Life was not a career, but a harsh test of survival. Picture a misty morning in a medieval field, with dew on the grass and a chill in the air. Peasants, with calloused hands and eyes dark from lack of sleep, began their day dragging wooden plows through rocky soil. With no day off, they worked from sunrise, usually 5 a.m., until darkness fell, sometimes as late as 9 p.m., stopping only when exhausted or when the light was too dim to see. The lords demanded high yields, and anyone who slacked off through illness, injury, or bad weather was punished with flogging or the confiscation of their small holdings. The pressure came not only from nature but also from the feudal system, where survival depended entirely on the will of the ruler. Women shouldered a double burden. In addition to plowing and harvesting alongside men, they also had to care for their families, cooking from scratch with scraps of grain and wild herbs, mending clothes with clumsy stitches by flickering candlelight, and raising children from the age of 5. Instead of going to school or playing, children were soon picking up hoes, carrying water, or tending cattle, learning to survive rather than to read. There was no childhood, no dreams, just a wooden plow, and the faint hope that the family would survive the winter. Work was not just labor, but also the pressure to survive, where each hoe stroke, each drop of sweat, was an affirmation that they were still alive. Illness or injury could leave a family starving, with no one to replace the main worker. A cut from a sickle, a sudden fever, or a sudden storm could destroy everything. Sundays, though a religious day of rest, were often broken by fighting against bandits or tending to the wounds of loved ones. Life was a relentless series of days, where every moment was a struggle for survival, and each day of survival a small victory over adversity. Part 6. Weather Challenge. Medieval weather was a relentless enemy. Winters were bitterly cold, with uninsulated homes and fireplaces fueled only by wood, a rare and sometimes illegal commodity. People huddled in wet clothes, their feet were freezing, and frostbite was a regular occurrence. Summers were another hell, with homes turned into hot clay ovens without fans or air conditioning. Burning sun, buzzing insects, and the stench of fermenting food added to the misery. No matter the season, laborers were forced to work despite their failing health. Imagine a cold winter night in a medieval village, with the wind whistling through the cracks in the mud and straw walls, bringing with it a biting cold. The houses are small thatched huts with small stone fireplaces, but firewood is scarce, and the collection of wood from the forest is sometimes forbidden by the lords to protect their own resources. People huddle in wet clothes. They have no time to dry them after a day of toiling in the rain. Their feet numb with cold, and frostbite becomes their constant companion, leaving black sores on their skin. Children cry out in the cold, while adults try to warm themselves by huddled around small fires, but the warmth is only enough to keep them alive through the night. Summer brought another challenge, as the houses, already cramped with mud walls and thatched roofs, turned into ovens under the scorching sun. With no fans or windows for ventilation, the air inside was suffocating with the smells of sweat, rotting food, and animal excrement from nearby barns. The sun burned the skin, leaving red burns on the necks and arms while insects buzzed around, sucking blood and carrying diseases like malaria and yellow fever. The stench of food, often dried meat or rotting vegetables, combined with body odor, creating an atmosphere so unbearable that residents sometimes slept outside under the stars to escape the heat. Despite the harsh weather, they still had to work. In winter, they dug in the cold, their hands shaking but not daring to stop. In summer, they harvested crops under the scorching sun, sweat pouring down their backs but with no clean water to drink. With no days off, no safe shelter, life became a battle with nature. Diseases such as pneumonia from cold or heat combined with malnutrition weakened the population. But they had to keep going, because stopping meant death, not only for themselves but for their dependent families. Part 7. Water. The silent enemy water, a vital resource, was a major threat. Wells were contaminated with garbage and animal carcasses, while rainwater was contaminated with parasites. People avoided drinking clean water, opting instead for beer, a lighter but safer beverage. Bathing was considered a health hazard, and public baths became more places for gossip than for hygiene. Water became a gamble, where every sip could lead to illness, making life even more precarious. Imagine a murky well in the center of a village where household garbage, rotting animal carcasses, and human excrement float on the surface. Rainwater, though clearer when collected from rooftops, contains parasites from rotting straw and accumulated dirt, making it a potential source of infection. People know that drinking water can mean death, diarrhea, fever, or parasitic diseases, like giardia, so they turn to beer, a soft drink that is boiled during fermentation, as a safer alternative. Children are encouraged to drink weak beer from a young age, while adults use strong alcohol to sterilize their mouths and warm their bodies. Bathing, rather than being a habit, was seen as a risk to the skin's natural protection, a common misconception at the time. It was believed that cold or dirty water could open pores, allowing disease to enter, leading to bathing being rare, occurring only a few times a year, usually in the summer, and with water warmed from a boiler. Public baths, although they existed, in some larger towns quickly became places for gossip, gambling, and even the spread of disease with their reused dirty water and cramped spaces. Every sip of water was a gamble, where parasites like E. coli or diarrhea-causing bacteria lurked, silently killing children and the elderly. People have learned to live with the risks, using water sparingly for cooking and irrigation, while staying away from wells that show signs of contamination, such as a foul smell or strange color. They dig new wells when the old ones become too dirty, but this is time-consuming and labor-intensive, and is often done only as a last resort. Instead of being a source of life, water becomes a silent enemy, threatening the survival of entire communities, forcing them to adapt to constant scarcity and danger. Part 8. Primitive medicine and myths. Medieval medicine is a strange story. Health was believed to depend on a balance of 4 humors: blood, secretions, yellow bile, and black bile. Fever, bloodletting, fatigue, laxatives. Surgery was performed with unwashed knives, and there was no concept of germs. Barbers were also doctors, using iron hooks to pull teeth. These methods did not cure disease, but merely prolonged suffering, in the vain hope that God would provide salvation. Imagine a dark room, candlelight flickering on the patient's pale face, where a barber, his clothes covered in hair and blood, holds a sharp knife and draws blood from the patient's arm in the belief that this will balance the body. The theory of the 4 humors, inherited from ancient Hippocrates and Galen, holds that health is a result of the harmony between blood, representing air, secretions, water, yellow bile, fire, and black bile, earth. High fever? Bleed to remove. Excess fluids. Tired? Take laxatives, often bitter herbal concoctions or salt water, to flush out poisons. These methods are not based on science but on blind faith, and often lead to death rather than recovery when the body loses too much blood or becomes exhausted from dehydration. Surgery, when it occurred, was a terrifying experience. Scalpels, usually razors or kitchen knives borrowed from the kitchen, were unsterilized and no one understood germs or infection. Barbers with limited skills but full of confidence doubled as doctors, using iron hooks to extract teeth or cut away diseased tissue while patients bit down on pieces of wood to endure the pain. There was no anesthesia, only brandy or crude opium to numb the pain, and groans filled the cramped spaces, mingling with the smell of blood and sweat. Medicine was not about healing, but about hope, where God was seen as the final arbiter, and priests often appeared to give blessings or recite prayers. Part 9. Food. Potential hazards. Medieval food was another struggle. There was no refrigeration. Food was preserved by hanging to dry, but it was full of flies and bad smells. Bread, the mainstay, was sometimes mixed with clay or sawdust during lean times. Vegetables were only available seasonally, and sugar, a luxury, increased the risk of tooth decay. Every meal was an adventure, with people having to balance hunger and poisoning. Imagine a piece of meat hanging from the rafters of a thatched hut, covered with flies and stinking day after day. Without refrigeration, people preserved food by drying it in the sun or by salting it with scant amounts of salt. But this did not prevent decomposition as flies laid eggs and bacteria grew. Bread, the staple and sometimes the only source of food, was often made from poor quality wheat or moldy barley, and in years of famine, Like after the Black Death, people mixed clay or sawdust into it to increase its volume, leading to illnesses like intestinal obstruction or chronic poisoning. Vegetables like turnips, onions, or cabbage were only available seasonally, and fresh fruit like apples or pears were rare, often fermented into wine or vinegar to preserve them. Sugar, though scarce and mostly imported from Arabia, began to make its way into the hands of the nobility, increasing the risk of tooth decay and digestive problems. Every meal was a dangerous adventure. Spoiled food, such as meat that had been left out for too long or vegetables that had grown moldy, could cause food poisoning, with symptoms like vomiting and diarrhea lasting days. Malnutrition led to rickets in children and weakness in adults, while people learned to recognize safe food by smelling it or tasting it, but often risked their health to fill their stomachs. Food was not only a source of survival but also a potential threat, shaping their approach to each day with anxiety and fragile hope. Part 10. The Birth of Frida Kahlo. A new flame from the darkness of the Middle Ages, we move into the light of art with Frida Kahlo. Born in Mexico in 1907, Frida grew up in a world of turmoil. A tram accident at the age of 18 changed her life, leaving her with permanent physical damage. But it was this pain that ignited her creative spark, transforming her into a unique artist who transcended all boundaries. Imagine a young girl in Mexico, growing up amid a vibrant indigenous culture and revolution. Frida Kahlo was born on July 6, 1907 in Coyoacán, to a family of mixed heritage. Her mother was indigenous to Mexico with Mixtec ancestry, and her father was Guillermo Kahlo, a German immigrant photographer. Her childhood was filled with the colors of small towns with church bells ringing and the smell of daisies in the air, but also the turmoil of the Mexican Revolution, 1910-1920, when gunfire and chants echoed through the streets. Her family lived in the Blue House, which would become Casa Azul, a place of both familial warmth and internal tension. At the age of 18, a horrific tram accident changed her life. On September 17, 1925, the bus Frida was riding on collided with a tram, severely damaging her spine, breaking her pelvis, and permanently damaging her left leg. She was sent home to bed with a metal frame holding her body in place, and it was during those painful days that she began to paint. Her first self-portraits were made from mirrors hung from the ceiling, where she could see her face between bouts of pain. The pain became her inspiration, as she painted her body with scars, blood, and Mexican symbols like daisies, monkeys, and deer, images that reflected both her physical and emotional pain. The accident not only took away her health but also opened the door to art. Frida painted not just to pass the time but also to tell her story, about her damaged body, about her cultural identity, and about her inner struggles. Her first paintings, such as Self-Portrait in a Velvet Dress 1926, shows her beginning to explore herself through art, albeit awkwardly. The pain of the accident combined with the subsequent surgeries, more than 30 in her life, did not break her but pushed her to become a unique artist, transcending all physical and social limitations. Part 11. Journey of Love and Art with Diego Rivera. Frida met Diego Rivera, a famous painter, and her life took a new turn. They married in 1929, a relationship fraught with betrayal and creativity. Diego encouraged Frida to develop her talent, but also caused emotional trauma by having affairs, including with her sister. Although they divorced in 1939, they reunited the following year, forming a deep friendship and artistic collaboration. Imagine an afternoon at the Mexican Ministry of Education in 1927, when Frida, then 20 years old and recovering from an accident, brought her first paintings to consult with Diego Rivera, a painter famous for his monumental murals of revolution and labor. Diego, with his large frame, round face, and outgoing personality, was captivated by Frida's talent and strong personality. He remarked that her paintings had a rare authenticity, and from there their relationship grew from artistic admiration to love. They married on August 21, 1929, an event that was controversial because of their age difference. Diego was 20 years her senior, and lifestyle. However, the relationship was far from peaceful. Diego, a man of unfaithful nature, had multiple affairs, with models, friends, and even Frida's sister Christina, who had helped care for her after her accident. This caused Frida great pain, leading to paintings such as A Few Small Nips, 1935, where she expressed anger and rebellion through images of blood and violence. Frida responded by finding her own loves, including relationships with revolutionary Leon Trotsky, who lived temporarily at Casa Azul from 1937-1939, and painter Georgia O'Keeffe, forming a complex but inspiring relationship. Despite the turmoil, Diego remained an inspiration to Frida. He encouraged her artistic development, introduced her to collectors and artists in the United States, and together they created works that reflected the revolution, Mexican culture, and social struggles. After their painful but necessary divorce on November 6, 1939, they reunited in 1940 on new terms, focusing on creative collaboration rather than traditional love. This relationship, while complicated, shaped both of their careers with work such as The Flower of Life, 1944, reflects the artistic harmony between them. Part 12. Creative Journey in America. In the 1930s, Frida followed Diego to America, where she faced luxury and injustice. In San Francisco, Detroit, and New York, she painted symbolic self-portraits that reflected her physical and emotional pain. An unsuccessful pregnancy in Detroit added to her anguish, but also inspired profound works in which her body became an artistic landscape. Imagine Frida entering America in 1930, where she is confronted with the contrast between the dazzling wealth of the upper class and the poverty of the Great Depression. She follows Diego to San Francisco, where he is commissioned to paint a mural for City Hall. And it is here that she begins to explore American industrial culture through self-portraits like Frida and Diego Rivera, 1931, where both painted in a modern yet Mexican setting. They then moved to Detroit, where Diego painted Detroit industry murals, and Frida experienced the pain of losing a child after an unsuccessful pregnancy in 1932. This pain is expressed in Henry Ford Hospital, 1932, with its images of her body, lying on a hospital bed bleeding, and symbols like fetuses and chrysanthemums, a raw account of loss. In New York, she continued to explore social injustice through My Dress Hangs There, 1933, reflecting the opulence of the wealthy and the isolation of the working class, and her years in America not only challenged her but also elevated her profile, with collectors beginning to notice her unique style, a fusion of surrealism and Mexican identity. Her body, with its scars and steel skeleton, became the main subject, where she transformed pain into art, laying the foundation for her later legacy. Part 13. Identity and Revolution. Back in Mexico, Frida immersed herself in leftist politics, welcoming Leon Trotsky and expressing her national identity through traditional dress. Her art was more than just paintings, it was a manifesto of revolution, culture, and resistance. Casa Azul, the Blue House, became a repository for her creative spirit. Imagine Frida returning to Mexico in 1934, dressed in the vibrant Tijuana dress of layered skirts, floral embroidery, and pearl necklaces, as a statement of national identity. She welcomed Leon Trotsky, the exiled Russian revolutionary, and his family to Casa Azul from 1937 to 1939, transforming the home into a center of leftist political movement. Her art, with symbols like broken hearts, monkeys, and daisies, reflected both her personal pain and her revolutionary aspirations. Self-Portrait with Cropped Hair, 1940, shows Diego's post-divorce rebellion, with short hair and men's clothing, challenging gender stereotypes. Casa Azul, with its cobalt blue walls and tropical gardens, became the place where she lived, loved, and created. It was here that she held intellectual meetings, painted, and even threw parties despite her failing health. Her art was a protest against pain, injustice, and oppression, with each painting a small revolution, affirming herself and her culture. After her death, Casa Azul became a museum, preserving her creative spirit. Part 14. Timeless Legacy. Frida's first solo exhibition in 1953 was a milestone, even though she arrived on a stretcher. She died in 1954, leaving behind a legacy of art and indomitable spirit. From paintings to cultural monuments, Frida became a global symbol of freedom, feminism, and the power to overcome adversity. Imagine Frida, frail but resilient, arriving for her first solo exhibition at Galeria Arte Contemporáneo in Mexico City on April 13, 1953, on a stretcher, greeting visitors with tequila and a radiant smile. It was a historic moment, even though her health had been weakened by surgeries and illness. She died on July 13, 1954, at Casa Azul, of a pulmonary embolism, a complication of her long-standing health condition, despite rumors of suicide by drug overdose. Her legacy lives on through paintings like The Two Fridas and The Broken Column, became a symbol of feminism, freedom, and strength to overcome adversity. Her legacy spans generations, with her face emblazoned on t-shirts, posters, and the Casa Azul Museum, which now attracts millions of visitors each year. She was not only an artist, but also an inspiration to queer, women, and disabled people, affirming that art is a force that transcends all barriers. Part 15. Lessons from history and art, from the harsh life of the Middle Ages to the artistic journey. Of Frida Kahlo, we learn that human strength lies in the ability to overcome adversity. History tells a story of survival, and art tells a story of hope. Join the channel Drop of Water of Origin Continue to explore similar journeys. Don't forget to follow and subscribe to join us. Imagine the contrast between the muddy medieval fields and Frida's daisy-filled studio at Casa Azul. History teaches us about the resilience of peasants in the face of poverty, disease, and harsh weather, while Frida's art evokes hope and resistance with every brushstroke. From her relentless labor under the pressure of her overlords to her colorful paintings that express pain and identity, both are testaments to the inner strength of the human spirit. The lesson here is the ability to transform pain into strength, either through the peasant's persistent labor or through Frida's artistic creation. Channel Drop of Water of Origin. We are committed to bringing you stories like these, helping you explore history and art in depth. We will continue our journey with topics like the Renaissance, other revolutionary artists, or life in faraway lands. Follow and subscribe to explore with us, and don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Each opinion is a motivation for us to be more creative. Together we will learn from the past and find hope for the future.